Hi, I'm Bryn Griffiths, your Labour Left podcast host, and today I'm delighted to welcome Bell Ribeiro-Addy. Bell entered Parliament as part of the new Labour Left intake of 2019, alongside numerous other excellent socialists such as Nadia Whittome, Apsana Begum, Kim Johnson and Ian Byrne. Bell has a fantastic history of fighting racism. Before becoming an MP in her own right, she was the Chief of Staff to Diane Abbott, Britain's first ever black MP and the Mother of the House. Bell hit the ground running with her maiden speech in Parliament when she took her fight right into the heart of the House. She said, "Let's address the historic injustices of the British Empire." You started as you meant to carry on, Bell. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you very much.
So let's have a look a bit at your history.
Mhm.
To put it mildly, your history, your personal history, I mean, is very different to the average member of Parliament. Your family history is West African Ghanaian.
Mhm.
You were born in the year of 1985 of the Brixton uprisings, and you were brought up in a council house on Brixton Hill. How do you think that your very different background as an MP to the average Oxbridge graduate has impacted upon your politics?
Well, I hope it's had a good impact. I think one of the perhaps worst things about my profession is it's not necessarily representative enough of the country, not representative enough of the people we are meant to represent, and we are meant to be the most significant group of representatives alongside councillors and things. We make decisions that really make impacts on people's lives. So the idea that we didn't reflect our public is a huge problem. I, however, was very pleased to come up in that 2019 intake because the fantastic thing about that intake is it brought about well, and obviously we have an even more diverse parliament now, but that 2019 intake it was like 80% women. It was 50% black and Asian ethnic minority, and it was 100% working class. And that was probably the first time, even amongst Labour MPs, that a new intake of MPs came in like that. So it was brilliant.
Let's look a bit deeper back into your history. I was fascinated when I was reading all about Bell to find out one of your early political actions was your opposition when you were very active in the National Union Students to a meeting that was being held by Andrew Bronze. And for those that don't have the misfortune to know who that creep is, he was the fascist British National Party member of the European Parliament, former member of the National Front, and it was proposed that he should speak at Durham University's Debating Society in 2010. And then you became involved. What happened, Bell?
Well, I mean, in the years leading up to that, the British National Party had a hold in certain areas, and it was actually having an impact. When they were actually had political office in places like Bradford, where they had membership on the council, it was having a negative impact on those communities. And wherever they were campaigning or planning to speak around student campuses, racist attacks were rising. And it was my job as the Black Students Officer, and that was the representative for all students of African, Arab, Asian, and Caribbean heritage in the country. It was my job to campaign against said racist attacks, and we actually wanted the talk stopped. The National Union of Students at the time had a no platform policy for fascists. As far as we were concerned, the British National Party were a fascist group, and we said that we would not share a platform with them, and we would not want other people to share a platform with them either. We knew that there would be a lot of protesting in the area, so I wrote to the university and explained to the university alongside another colleague of mine who was the LGBT officer, because, as I said, BNP are a fascist group, and said that, this was going ahead, racist attacks would increase against students. And if it was going to go ahead, that we were going to protest. I was accused of threatening the university with bringing up loads of protesters, and I was eventually censured by the NUS. However, my colleague that signed the letter with me was not censured.
I understand that was because some people were out of the room at the time. Or?
It was because some people were out of the room at the time, but when it came up to him, he made the point in his speech. He said, "I am a white man, and and now you have called the vote for me individually at a time when everyone's back in the room. Now imagine what it's going to look like for you to censure." a black woman and to not censure me for doing exactly the same thing.
I understand there was a rather prominent future Labour minister involved in your censure.
I mean, he wasn't directly involved, but I believe he voted for it.
And who was that?
That was Wes Streeting.
An early introduction to a man that you were going to know well in the future. I think that's pretty shocking that in the National Union of Students you could be censured for running a campaign to no platform. Like Bronze used to be in the National Socialist
National
movement.
Front, yeah. No, I understand.
In the National Socialist movement in the 1960s.
Oh, was he?
Before
Okay.
the National Front. He was the real deal, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it was all about Durham University's anger at me writing the letter, the fact that I went straight to the head of the university as opposed to Students' Union, and Durham University actually disaffiliated for the next few years until I left the National Union of Students. Yeah, and as I said, I was accused of threatening people, but I believe in being very direct in my communication. Some people like it, some people don't. I just think. I just had to be very, very clear about the fact that racist attacks were already increasing because it was being advertised, and the fact that we were going to protest. We were not going to let it go ahead unmarked. And as I said, it caused a lot of controversy. But he did not speak.
That's good. Oh, that's the most important thing. I think that for people that don't remember the National Front and the British National Party that have become more engaged recently, I think they're quite different to the populist right of Nigel Farage, aren't they? They were real fascists. They were the real deal, not somebody that could develop into being a fascist. They were the real deal, weren't they?
No, they were the real deal, and you know, we're talking about, sadly, a situation which we seem to be rolling back into. We thought that the days of people being physically assaulted for the colour of their skin had long gone. But we think about those protests outside the hotels, the refugee hotels, and the way in which people were literally looking to set them on fire and harm people. And we think about the two recent sexual assaults of women specifically because of their heritage.
What else did you do as the Black Students Officer of the National Union of Students? That sounds like quite an important part of your political awakening.
No, it was definitely one of the major things that we did is campaign for international students who continue to be exploited and have huge amounts of money taken from them in order to study in the UK and then get treated appallingly whilst they're here. But one of the things we did in terms of education is we found, and this is some previous officers of mine who held the same role as me, found that if you had a typically African or Asian sounding name, you were likely to get up to 20% lower marks in your, and obviously that's across 2 degree classifications, makes a massive difference. And what we did, and people find this shocking now, that there wasn't universal anonymous marking right across our academic institutions. It wasn't 100% of colleges and universities weren't doing this at the time. So what we did is we got one particular university to trial it for us whilst we continued to campaign elsewhere. So they trialed it for a year, and they found that the marks of students with African and Asian sounding names went up by exactly 20%, which was great for our campaign because we proved it. But also the marks of women went up by 9%. Which shows that there was a lot of misogyny at play. And so that firmly made the case for anonymous marking right across the board, right across all universities and for all different types of assessments.
So generations of women and black people have got better grades because of Bell.
Well, not just me as the entire campaign, because the campaign started a few years before, but no, I think we definitely cemented that. And yeah, whilst we are right across the NUS, as you heard, we didn't always agree on this particular issue. We all did agree, and there was a fantastic outcome as a result. And we're seeing at the moment that it makes massive difference. I would love to see that translated into in terms of anonymity into job applications, because there's a significant amount of evidence that supports that as well, that women and black and Asian people are not getting through to the interview stage just because they're being passed over when people see their ethnicity or their gender in their name.
Yeah, when I first started working in local government, I was in London in the 80s, first of all, the Greater London Council. and we got very used to the person specification that you determined beforehand that you fitted the candidate with. And it was the first part of the process to get to the interview. It was a very factual based process. And I feel that some of that's getting rolled back now. And that was a real victory when we started to have equal opportunities employment practice.
Yeah, definitely a huge victory. And I worry about the future of the country at the moment.
But then you managed to land eventually a cracking job for somebody of your political background. You ended up working, I think it was before 2019, as Diane Abbott's chief of staff. How did you pull that off? Because that's one hell of a job to get.
No, it was an amazing honor to do that. I went to a couple of places before then. I worked for the National Assembly Against Racism. I was studying again. I was retraining to be a lawyer. I worked for the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. I worked in a nursery. I worked in a bar. So I did a lot of different things in and amongst studying. When I'd finished being the Black Students Officer, and I'd come across Diane Abbott a number of times then, she put herself forward to stand as the Labour leader.
She got on the ballot, didn't she?
Yeah. There was a huge fight for that. So, and you know what? It was actually a great time, and for me, it was a great example of how an underdog in a competition can control the narrative.
Yeah.
And she very much did. And I volunteered for her during that period of time. So I was able to go out a lot of the time assisting her when she was traveling to these different hustings, because generally, unlike the recent deputy leadership election, our elections are meant to take longer to make sure that we have a full democracy at play. And so I would go to all of these different places with Diane and hear how over the different hustings she had managed to pull all of the other candidates closer and closer to her way of thinking, because they saw the reaction that she was getting from the members. And we have to remember that no matter what's happened with leaderships over the past, the members of the Labour Party are generally a huge progressive base. And I remember one of them, it was a great one, when someone just got up and asked what the price of milk was. And Diane was the only person that knew. I think someone else came close, but she was the only person that knew what the price of milk was. And this particular member was sold that he was going to vote for her. So that's how I started. 2010. I worked for Diane's leadership campaign, and then over those years, I would, whilst working other jobs and studying, I would come and volunteer for her. But then I think an incident happened in her office where someone got really sick, and she didn't want them to feel like somebody would take over their whole job, and she thought that they should focus on getting better, and she said they could do that if there was someone they knew. So I was studying law at the time, and so I had a few hours, and Diane said, well, come in and help me with my policy correspondence. We share the same politics, so I won't be teaching you to suck eggs, and I can just get you to help respond to my constituents, because something that Diane is very, very firm on, and something that I carry on in my own office, is if your constituents write to you, the least you could do is respond to them.
A good lesson for Labour MPs.
Yes, absolutely. So I started there. I started part-time, volunteering whilst I was studying, and then it just led to another job. And then Jeremy Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party, and she needed a political advisor for international development. So I took up that. Then for health, then for home affairs. And then by that time, I'd found myself running her office. And the title of Chief of Staff wasn't something that came about instantaneously. My duties didn't change much between being a senior political advisor and her Chief of Staff. What had happened is there was more of a need for me to do certain things, and being one of the only Black political advisors at the time, people weren't necessarily willing to talk to me. So we decided to change my title so that they understood that I suppose I was due some respect in terms of handling certain situations on her behalf.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And not only is there sort of the undercurrent of, let's call it racism, there's also the civil service is sort of notoriously hierarchical, isn't it?
Notoriously so. But yeah, so that the title actually sounded nice, but it was more practicality than an actual change in duties.
And why shouldn't Diane have a chief of staff?
I mean, essentially that's what I was. Yeah.
So let's talk about Diane a little bit. I was in her constituency for a little while.
Oh,
I was
wow.
also lucky enough to be in Bernie's constituency as well when he was alive, Bernie Grant. I think she became an MP due to the self-organisation of black people in the Labour Party black sections movement. And I was just wondering, for you, as this new generation of black women MPs or black MPs, what does that legacy of black sections formed back in 1983 that gave us the likes of Diane and Paul Boateng and Bernie Grant mean to you?
Personally, it's hugely important, and I think in order to distinguish myself, I think we have to recognise to actually it's not going to be important to all Black and Asian MPs currently. For some of them, I think they'd rather not be associated with it at all. But I, on the other hand, do very much understand that if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't exist. I mean, there was literally a time when people thought that it was completely ludicrous that people of color, especially more than one at a time, let's say, could be in the House, could be representatives in the House of Commons. And I mean, even when they were elected, hearing Diane talk about, they had meetings to discuss what they were going to do about these people that had been elected and were coming into Parliament, and how they were going to deal with them. And you know what? And the state even spied on them. That's how much suspicion there was. And if you remember, this was only 38 years ago now. It wasn't that long ago that it was considered ludicrous or even dangerous to have people that look like me as members of Parliament.
I'll never forget the moment of Bernie Grant's first speech in Parliament, dressed in his traditional African dress.
Yeah.
It was just sort of, it was a fantastic moment.
I mean, obviously, I was only 2 at the time, but I've seen it since.
Yeah, it was quite a moment. It was like he'd broken into the public school boys club, and he just wasn't playing by the rules. It was fantastic. Yeah, and the black section struggle, I don't think it was pretty heavy at the time. There was a lot of hostility.
Even from some sections of the left, which people would prefer not to remember, as if it never happened. But yeah, I know some people are saying, well, why are we focusing on this? And actually, it's very divisive. And yeah, I think it's important to, and obviously when I say the left, I mean the left of the Labour Party. Not everybody was convinced by the idea of the black sections, but black self-organisation is so important, as is self-organisation for all other liberation struggles. And that doesn't mean that we don't have allies and people that work with us, because there's always and there's a great need for that. But the importance of those that are experiencing these particular issues leading the way is as much a part of the campaign for liberation than everything else that is done to get there. If those who are being disadvantaged cannot be the ones to lead the way themselves, then it's not liberation at all.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I remember, because I was around at the time, that there was the militant tendency, which has now become the Socialist Party, opposed black sections as divisive.
Yeah, and I believe they weren't necessarily the only ones, but
there was leading figures in the Labour Party that referred to it as segregation and apartheid, not anti-apartheid, apartheid. That black people should separately organise to bring their voice back into the Labour movement. It seems unbelievable now, but it was at the time just like that. Anyway, let's bring us straight up to date, more recent stuff, because the struggle never ends, does it? Tell us your story, because about your work with Diane when there was attempts to try and deselect her before the last general election, and her removal of the party whip today. What's your take as an MP on that?
Well, for me, obviously, and it's difficult to separate it from the personal for an MP. Diane is very much a mentor and a mother figure to me. And whilst I don't work for her anymore, I always very much make the joke that once you work for Diane Abbott, you always work for Diane Abbott. And the idea that I suppose anybody could do that to her, Made me deeply uncomfortable. It almost made me feel like the time I first walked into Parliament with her, and I by this time I wasn't actually working for her at the time, but we had come from somewhere else. This is I think during her campaign. We walked into Parliament. I went through security obviously because I wasn't a pass holder at the time, and then she took me through, and we were in Portcullis House, and we were making our way to the lift to get to her office, and a police officer came out of nowhere, and he said, he pointed to Diane, and he said, "Where's your pass?" Meanwhile, she had the pass in her hand, and she showed it to him, and I was horrified. I
Mm.
thought to myself, I mean, I understand racism, I understand discrimination, but this was Diane Abbott, and she had been a member of Parliament for nearly 25 years at that time. And you obviously know who she is because she's on television every single week. How on earth could you possibly think that it was okay to stop her in this way? And then he turned to me and said, "Who's she?" And she's like, "Well, she's with me." And so in shock, I walked quietly to the lift before I plucked up the courage to say, "Does that happen a lot?" And she said, "More often than you might think."
Gosh.
The idea that I suppose such someone who has contributed so much could be treated in such a way, and I suppose any group, even my own, um, would think that the general public, and in particular the black community, would stand for it is beyond me. But that is, I think, the nature of how things have gone at times.
Yeah. Like famously, she received almost half of the abusive tweets sent to women MPs when there was a study done, didn't she? What
Yeah,
was it
I
like
remember
working in Diane's office when you were getting that level of abuse? It must have been pretty grim.
it was quite grim. And I remember how we got to a situation where she even said anything about it. I think we just come from a Labour Party conference, and this was, I suppose, what we had to deal with. We've gone to a Labour Party conference, and I think we just had the Brexit vote. And Diane went to a left meeting. It was a left anti-racist meeting, actually. And it was full of people who probably would have actually voted for Brexit. And the police had just released a report that said that people were using Brexit as an excuse to commit some racist incidents. So Diane, at this meeting, which we had recorded, said, "We, the vote has happened, and I understand that many people in this room probably would have voted for Brexit. I know that you're not racist because we're here at an anti-racist meeting." She said, "But the police have reported an increase in racist incidents and said that people have been doing this since Brexit. So we have to be very wary of what some people are using this to do." So the next day, the Daily Mail and the Sun say Diane Abbott says all 18, well, however many million people that voted for Brexit are racist.
Mm.
The week afterwards, we are hit with just the most unrelenting abuse, people just sending things left, right, and center. At some point, somebody called the phone and was shouting the N-word down the phone. And we were blocking people left, right, and center. But we got to a point where I think, and then the Daily Mail and the Sun would do this often, and they would always end up being the ones that would attract the abuse. We got to a point where having blocked somebody, someone went and found my personal email to send Diane a threat, a death threat, not any general threat, a death threat. And by this time, myself and my colleague, we were beaten down, and we just couldn't take it. We went into Diane's office, and we were like, "You have to say something about this, because it is too much. It is too much to see. It's too much to read." We were both so upset, I remember, and I think that was the first instance where Diane wrote an article for The Guardian, I think, and she laid out exactly what happens. And then people started to do assessments of it, and that's when they found out about receiving half of all of the abuse. And I start with the media example because part of the reason why she receives abuse, and everybody receives abuse, all MPs generally receive some form of abuse just by nature of the job. But the reason why somebody like her receives that level of abuse is because the media have consistently and for decades kind of made out that she was fair game. I think one publication even wrote at the time it's open season on Diane Abbott as if it was a normal thing. Yeah, so a lot of that has been perpetuated by them. People think that it is acceptable to lay abuse and to write various awful things and to threaten Diane. And that was horrible to see.
The thing that flashed through my mind when you were speaking there was that terrible description of the state of British politics has at times spilt over into the Labour Party. And what we read in the National Executive Committee's Ford report suggests that it's not only people on the far right that have behaved in an appalling manner to Diane, isn't it?
No, it isn't. And that I think there's nothing more appalling than the fact that a lot of those people have been protected and have not paid the price for what they've done. Could you imagine if it had been said about someone else or done to someone else? But like I said again, people have this warped idea that it's okay to do this to her. And the worst thing about it is Diane didn't ask to be the first black woman MP. In fact, there were two other black women that should have been elected but were removed from having been selected, were removed from contesting by the Labour leader at the time. She took that burden on unknowingly, and then she went on to continue to stand firm in the politics that brought her there, not diverting like some others and towing the line. She stood firm, and obviously years later, some of the things that she argued for and about are the types of things that people accept as norm today. But yeah, she's paid the price for doing that.
She's paid the price, but I'll tell you what, two things. I saw the people of Hackney on the steps of Hackney Town Hall when her position as an MP was threatened. And how many British MPs would have hundreds and hundreds of people turn up at the town hall to demand that they be reinstated? I think that shows the love she's held in. And I saw her talking about her book at the Cambridge Literary Festival. Her session ended up with a standing ovation from everybody in the room. So she's suffered a lot, but my goodness, she's admired as well. She's admired.
Yeah, no, she is. And you know, the one thing that consoles me about those horrible people, and there are too many of them to name, and it's just that actually no one's ever going to know who they are. They thought or they think they are so important right now. But, you know, long after Diane's gone, you know, they'll write books, they'll make films. She will be remembered as someone who made history. And these people are just going to be footnotes in that history. Nobody's going to give a damn about who they are.
So treading in the likes of Diane's footsteps, how does
there's only one Diane.
how does Bell become the MP for Clapham and Brixton in 2019? What's the story behind that?
In my local area, there was a young black man, younger at the time, obviously we were all younger then, standing to be the new MP, and his name was Chuka Umunna. And I happened to run into him at a Progressive London conference. That was the conferences that Ken Livingstone used to organise during that period of time when he wasn't the Mayor of London, to keep London's progressive base together. So, okay, this is good. Guy on the left, and you know that was a time when we were worried about the election, and we had every cause to be, because obviously that's about when things started to go wrong, and you know we lost the country. And I remember promising that I would go out campaigning for him, so I did. And you know, up until that time, I had suspicions of the Labour students having come through student politics. I was very upset with the Labour Party, the war in Iraq, student fees, these things. But, you know, these things had got to me. But generally, my family had always voted Labour. I had always voted Labour. I remember when the first Labour MP was elected in my area, I was just 5 years old, and even I was roped into that kind of campaigning. My mum made me do leafleting before we could go to the park. That's I suppose when my campaigning started. But here I was again in 2010, leafleting because the country was at stake, and obviously whilst we were more likely to win in our area, we had a new candidate and things were going to be a problem. But I thought it's okay, young progressive guy, much like me. And I remember speaking to some of the members. I was like, oh, some of these, Labour perhaps a little bit too right for me. But then I got paired with one young woman who was actually involved in the student movement like myself, and it was funny because she had some of the same battles that I had with some sections of student politics, and and she was saying, why haven't you joined yet? And I explained to her why, that I wasn't sure, and I didn't necessarily want to be tied down, and I didn't agree with everything. And she reminded me, and this is before I got to go out and see that progressive base of Labour Party right across the country, the majority of Labour members were actually like her, and that the majority of Labour members agreed with the things that I was saying. And she was like, well, if people like Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell and Diane Abbott can be MPs in the Labour Party, why can't you? Like, we need to be part of the fight back. So that night I went home and I joined. Years later, working for Diane, people kept asking me if I wanted to stand to be an MP. And I thought to myself, if you've worked for Diane and you're a black woman on the left, why would you even think that was a good idea? If you could only be a certain way, you would know what level of abuse you were going to get. And there are people that actually wanted me to having campaigned for this person to try and remove them at the time, and I was like, absolutely, I would never do that. I may not have agreed with him, but actually I understand that there were issues of black representation right across our country, and no way would I be looking to try and remove another black MP. And
He
I said to
removed
them,
himself, though, didn't he?
he did remove himself. Yeah, because, and I said, well, if he wasn't there, fair enough, but he is. And then just be careful what you say, I guess, because in a couple of months later, he wasn't there. And I got
Change
asked again.
UK he joined, didn't
Change
he?
UK.
And then
Change
became a
UK.
Liberal.
Then became a Liberal. And then left the area. So my home, and I've lived here my whole life. I'm speaking from here, which is where I am. And I suppose the question became, why not me? I had spent years working for an MP, and as far as I'm concerned, learnt the best way in which to represent my constituents, and the time perhaps had come. So all of those issues of doubt and actually a lot of fear. The main thing was fear. If there's anything that was going to stop me, it was, oh my gosh, you're going to get abused so much. But I suppose fear is not a reason not to do something. Also, Diane Abbott was very, very encouraging. In fact, she was over encouraging. There was one time when I was delaying over sending something in, and she said, "I'm going to come to your house and push send for you." So she's a motivator.
You've got a bit of a record of that. I've heard stories of when Jeremy, there was the chicken coup, and they were trying to get him to resign, blocking the door. Not letting him out.
The funny thing about that didn't actually happen.
Oh, didn't it? I've heard the story a few times.
It was some journalist said they heard that this is what she was doing, and it was funny because we were in our office, members of her staff in her office, and we were watching this on the TV, and the journalist said, Diane Abbott is literally blocking the door, and one of my colleagues jumped up, and she was like, I was like, where are you going? She said, oh my gosh, they're probably pushing and shoving Diane. We need to get down there and help her hold the door. I said, don't be ridiculous. There is absolutely no way that she's doing this. Like, why don't we just call her and see where she is? So I called her, and you know what? She was having lunch on the terrace. And this is what they're saying about you. And I think it was the BBC, actually. So I said, could you take a selfie of yourself? Could you take a selfie and post it? And she did take a selfie, but unfortunately she wasn't too well versed in taking the selfies. It kind of cut off half her face. But basically, she posted online that she was having lunch on the terrace, and she didn't know what was happening in Jeremy's office. So and that's what I mean. When it comes to stories about Diane, they can reach so far before we've even verified the truth. And years later, people can be asking questions about it, because there are still some people that believe that she said that thing about Brexit, and clearly there are still some people that believe that she was actually holding a door.
Well, I was one of them until you put me right. Although, come to think about it, seeing that John McDonnell's story is he chucked them all out when they came to see Jeremy. That would have been rather odd if Diane was holding the door if John was chucking them out.
Well, Diane wasn't there to tell me what actually happened, so I don't know.
And so you arrive in Parliament, and you certainly set out your political stall when you said in your maiden speech to Parliament, let's address the historic justices of the British Empire. You've got to tell us about that speech, Bell, because you weren't pulling your punches. You're supposed to make a local speech that isn't particularly controversial, where you congratulate your predecessor and talk about how wonderful your constituency is. And you were talking about the historic injustices of the British Empire.
I did all of that. And then I talked about the historic injustices of the British Empire. So I did leave time for it. And I remember I was very nervous about doing it. And I spent a lot of time, and as Diane liked to say, if you were going to do this for me, you would have done it by now. I'm like, yes, this is true. And I spent a lot of time dithering about what it was going to be. And I did actually go to Diane and speak to her. So and, we went over, you're meant to talk about your constituency, say something nice about your predecessor, which I did. And she said, but most importantly, you're meant to tell them who you are. I was like, okay.
I don't think that's the official bit. I think that's the
No,
Diane school.
She's like, you're meant to tell them who you are. And she was like, she gave her maiden speech on a really horrible immigration bill, actually. And she's, well, you don't have to you don't have to tune it with what's being debated at the time. You do have to make some reference to it, but obviously it helps if it's in line with what you're saying. So I was looking at what debates were coming up, and one of them was on global Britain. And it was meant to be the Tories having a great time and talking about what a great thing they'd done by delivering Brexit and pushing Brexit forward. And obviously we hadn't made the final vote. No, we hadn't made the final votes on it, but what a great thing it was going to be that we were moving forward with Brexit, and how we were going to be global Britain. And it sounded to me like they were going to be talking about empire and hearkening back to those days of the British Empire. And I thought, I'm not going to have any of this. It's outrageous. And so that was what spurred on my speech. The point from Diane to say, tell them who you are, but also in making reference to what was being debated that day, that there's absolutely no way that we can continue to think and feel as if we are above the rest of the world, and not think about addressing some of the things that we have done in the past.
And by 2021, you'd become what the patchwork charity called the Newcomer Member of Parliament of 2021. So obviously making a bit of an impact.
It was great. It was great to win that award at the time.
We'll be back with Bell in a moment, but first, if you're enjoying the show, please can you subscribe on YouTube, Substack, or your favourite podcast platform. You can delve into our back catalogue of previous shows. Our guests in the past have included Bell's Socialist Campaign Group colleagues Richard Bergen and John McDonnell. Listener numbers for the Labour Left podcast are steadily rising, and you can help us reach an even wider audience by liking and following the podcast wherever you watch or listen to the show. Please, please, please share it with your friends on your socials and your local WhatsApp groups as it gets the podcast to a wider audience. In our next episode, we'll be talking to Ted Ham from New York, who is the author of the excellent new book, Run, Zoran, Run. Join us to take a look inside Mandani's inspiring campaign to become New York's first Democratic Socialist mayor. Ted will be bringing us some pre-Christmas cheer from across the Atlantic as we explore the big question, how can the left win again? Finally, check out Labour Hub for all the best news from the Labour left on the internet. Now, back to Bell to hear how she joined the Socialist Campaign Group. So when you joined Parliament, you were straight into the Socialist Campaign Group. How did it feel to enter what Peter Mandelson once called the sealed tomb? Why did you join?
Well, do you know, it just so happened is that the Labour Party conference before the election, I was just a candidate at the time. I actually got to chair the session at conference. So the rally, the Socialist Campaign Group rally, that was my first gig as the group, even before I got made a member of Parliament, which was great. I got to
not usually a short gig from my memory, because they all speak, don't they? I always used to joke that it was the longest fringe meeting at Labour Party conference.
But you know, it's the longest fringe meeting, but it's also the most invigorating one. It's the one that is towards the end of conference, and even if we'd been bashed about by amendment, by the end of that rally, I always felt like we're here for a reason. And I got to chair it that first time, and I suppose from then to me, it was very clear where my politics were. I'm not against people, having different views across the party. I mean, we touched on Wes Streeting earlier. I mean, I believe that there's a place for both me and Wes in the Labour Party. We don't even necessarily have to agree. We just have to agree that we're Labour, and that when the time comes, yes, we may disagree with each other within the party, but actually we should spend more time fighting people outside of the party than each other.
I agree with that, but having read a number of books recently about the Starmer years and Labour Together, I'm not sure that ethos is a view that's universally shared.
No, it's I can imagine it isn't one that's universally shared. However, no, I definitely still think it's true. I just wish, when I think about what's happening at the moment, and actually when I hear, like, you'll see people in different articles, perhaps I've said something at a rally or something, and then you've got someone, a Labour NEC member or a senior Labour source, making comments about something that I've said. And I think to myself, really, I think you should give just more effort to perhaps reform, or actually some of the left parties that are coming up and challenging us at the moment. I am by no means the biggest problem, and the focus that we have internally is so disruptive. I really do think we need to look at the challenges at hand. And actually, we're in government now. We can actually deliver for people. We need to stop making excuses and get on and do it.
And lots of constituency Labour parties and a lot of branches, that animosity and nastiness between the different wings of the party is not present. It certainly is in the higher echelons of the Parliamentary Labour Party, but it's in your average constituency. We all rub along and have a bit of an argument and go down the pub afterwards, don't we?
Yeah, and that's fine. And we need to do more of that, because at the moment, our membership is dropping. And what are we without our members?
Exactly. So you're in Parliament, you've made your maiden speech, and then Jeremy Corbyn appoints you, when you've been there barely months, on the 24th of January 2020, you become the Shadow Minister for Immigration. It was a short-lived reign, but what did you get up to while you were doing it?
Reign. Do you know, it was always expected.
Got rid of you on the 9th of April, didn't it?
It was always expected to be a short-lived reign. And I think, well, not that was part of it, but I had worked on the brief with Diane, so I was familiar with the policy. But also, I suppose, compared to other new members of Parliament, I was familiar with Parliament. So it's one of those, well, you can do it. And I think part of the issue is we had a lot of anti-immigration things coming up from the Tories immediately: Jamaica deportation flights, charter flights, and a lot of awful stuff about asylum seekers. So I think it was just we need someone that can deal with it now, who already knows what we're going to ask, who's not going to be too nervous about getting up and speaking at the dispatch box. I think that just made the most sense. I had to face off against the Home Secretary at the time, Priti Patel, a couple of times. It was an interesting period. But yeah. Yeah,
if you're going to take the anti-racist and class struggle into Parliament, you want to face off against the likes of Priti Patel, don't you?
You know what? That day was great, actually. The first time I did it was great, because I think because it was my first time giving a full speech. Both Diane and Jeremy made sure they came into the chamber, and they sat either side of me, and they shouted back at her as many times.
So what's it like with the stalwarts and veterans in the campaign group? How much support, and what's your relationship with them? The ones that have been there and seen it all, what's it like working with them?
Well, we meet every week, and as many of us try and get there as possible, depending on schedules and traveling, everything. But no, I mean it's good, and as I said, with every single group, no one's going to agree on absolutely everything all the time. But I think the most important thing is that we're able to talk about it, and support each other, because it does feel hostile at times.
Talking about hostility, you had another role, didn't you, that you managed to get sacked from, which was the Ghanaian trade envoy, which you seem...
Yeah.
Is there how many other Ghanaian MPs, dissenters there in Parliament? Is there many? You seem pretty suited for that role, but you were sacked.
No, I did seem pretty suited for that role. And it was funny, because obviously I know what I am like. So when I was offered the role, which I might add is not a ministerial role.
No.
First question I asked was, do I have to behave myself? The chief whip, who's used to my frankness, tried not to laugh, and he said, "You're not meant to break the whip, Bell." but no, it is not. It's not one bound by collective responsibility. However, do remember that the party giveth and the party taketh away. And I said, well, if I don't have to behave myself, then that's fine. That would be great. I don't mind being the Ghana trade envoy. I chair the APPG on Ghana, and I'm really interested in...
What's the SPG?
Oh, the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Ghana. So I'm really interested in doing things, and it's the country of my family's heritage, and I don't mind visiting more often in that particular role. So I took up the role and hit the ground running, but it was taken away. As they said, the government giveth and the government taketh away.
It seems the height of pettiness. You vote for a policy which is opposed by the overwhelming majority of Labour Party members, and you get removed as the Ghanaian trade envoy. It tells us so much about the disciplinary culture in the Labour Party today. That little story.
I mean, yeah, I didn't think it was necessary, but as they said, I mean, to me, it is what it is. It's theirs to give. They don't want me to have it. They don't want me to have it. We move on.
Well, let's move on to the deputy leadership campaign. Like we've all heard the story of, and so many different angles and versions of how Jeremy found himself thrust forward back in 2015.
It's pretty much the same.
So how did it happen to you? How did you get pushed forward to the front of the queue on the 8th of September 2025?
On the 8th of September, it's Socialist Campaign Group decision. There was a lot of discussions beforehand. Obviously, one thing that we didn't use as much when it was Jeremy was, or did we use at all? Did we have WhatsApp back in 20? I can't remember. But there were a lot of discussions on the group, and then we had a meeting in person, but there were loads of votes going on, so it was going all around. So a lot of it was eventually decided via group. Majority of members agreed, and that was that. I mean, we knew what it was going to be. It was going to be 3 days of making the case, but as we have done in the past in terms of the Socialist Campaign Group, whoever it is that is selected with the support of everybody else makes the case as much as possible, and most importantly tries to pull whoever the other candidates are in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, John McDonnell, who's one of the people I've recently interviewed on the podcast, referred to the whole process as a stitch-up. But you made...
Who am I to disagree with John McDonnell?
I think he's nailed it. You fought a pretty effective 3-day campaign. You talked earlier about shifting the agenda by actually having a voice, even if it's only 3 days. So what kind of policies and arguments were you putting forward in that 3-day campaign?
3 days. 3 key things were, and I even got them to repeat the phrase, which was interesting: we can't out-reform reform. We're going to have to focus on doing what we do best, just being Labour. And the others is the focus on the membership, because I genuinely agree that if we listen to our members, we don't get it wrong. I mean, way back when, if we had listened to our members on Iraq, we wouldn't have gone down that road. And more recently on the benefit cuts, if we'd listened to our members, we wouldn't have gone down that road. And our members know what they're talking about. And then I think the final one was more specifically on the 2-child benefit cap.
Majoritarian Labour policies amongst the membership.
Basically, and I think because of the reaction, I suppose, that what I was saying was getting, I think they just picked up quickly that that's what you say. My
favourite moment, and I'd like to show the watchers and listeners a clip, was your unique clarity amongst the different candidates on the question of Peter Mandelson. Let's have a listen to what you had to say on Channel 4 News.
Given, as you pointed out, Lord Mandelson has been sacked as ambassador. Is it right that he continues to sit on the Labour benches in the Lords when he returns?
I think there are going to be a lot of questions about that, and just with all things, there should be some sort of investigation. I have colleagues who don't have the whip. They do not have the whip for simply how they voted, and voting in line with their conscience or voting in line with their constituents wanted. I think what's happened in this case is far worse.
Well, you talk about questions, so just to answer this one, should Lord Mandelson have the whip withdrawn in the Lords? Should he lose his seat in the Lords? Should he be suspended?
I think, as with everybody, when something like this arises, there should be an investigation, and usually when there's an investigation, somebody doesn't have the whip whilst there's an investigation. So, yeah. whilst there's an
so
investigation.
suspend him.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, that's what usually happens to everybody else. And if we are going to be applying things fairly, then that should probably be the case.
Thanks so much, Bell, for speaking for the overwhelming majority of Labour members and stating the bleeding obvious. Why was he ever appointed? What was Starmer thinking? What was your view at that point?
I mean, everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people, let's say, a lot of people thought it was strange, because obviously there is people make these appointments and they try and make sure that they appoint someone who's not going to get them into trouble later down the line in terms of things that you could dig up. And obviously for someone like Peter Mandelson, there's stuff that everybody knows that somebody might pick up on. The things that got him into trouble this time were things that were revealed. And to be honest, in this particular instance, I would say no leader is an island. So I'm not even sure it was entirely his decision.
But it was really striking. You were the only one of the candidates that was immediately clear on what not just the majority of Labour members, but the vast majority of the British public could see was obvious. It was a lovely moment. I'm going, yes,
I'm glad you enjoyed
somebody on the television saying it as it is. You know, it was great. And so what you mentioned, you worked for Palestine Solidarity Campaign, but you mentioned the Gaza and Palestine in your campaign. Do you just want to set out what your stance was on that as well?
Oh yeah, actually that was another point. I mean, again, this was talking about what the membership were saying. If we'd listened to the membership on Gaza from the beginning, instead of, I suppose, having to be dragged to the position we are in now. And I do remind people that we are in a much better position than we were before, and that has been due to the sheer tenacity of campaigning that people have done, but obviously also the appalling situation. It shouldn't have taken us that long to get there. We have to accept that what's happening is a genocide. I know we've got a ceasefire in place that's barely being adhered to, which is a huge problem. And the idea that we have sat there and watched tens of thousands of people be slaughtered whilst we watched it live, whilst we've watched it ongoing on television, has to make us feel sick.
So the 3-day campaign, I think, has raised your profile. Are you happy to be invited to come along and speak at Labour Party meetings in the constituencies if you're asked?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always easier if they're ones that aren't too far away. I think it's important to be able to speak to as many members, and I genuinely recognise that they're not as many of us in the campaign group, but there are a number of local parties that are very much of the same view. And it's important that they're active, because actually when it comes down to it, who's going to go out and campaign? I mean, this is one of the reasons why I actually stood for the deputy leadership, not with any grand ideas of winning, because I'm not a particularly ambitious person in that sense, but I had to prove to myself that the Labour Party still had that progressive pace, but then also on proving that there was that progressive pace, send a signal to them that we are still here.
And it really matters to us in the constituencies, because I'm sure I speak for many people. We want to hear our voice as the socialists in the Labour Party represented. And so it was so important. I was so delighted when the campaign group decided to stand a candidate. Some people said, oh, you've got no chance. And I said, well, that's not the point. We just need to hear that socialist voice within the Parliamentary Labour Party. And you did it. So
Ian Lavery always likes to start off with, they don't call it the struggle for nothing. The idea that we would just give up because it's hard makes no sense. That's not how we've won working class campaigns in the past.
Yeah, there's all the stuff with Tony Benn talking about. Sometimes you've just got to toughen up and refight the same struggles again and again and again, and we can't give up. So Lucy Powell wins. Now,
not unexpected at all.
Not unexpected at all. By no means of any stretch of the imagination part of the left, but what does the impact of her victory mean? What do you think it represented?
For a lot of people, they saw her as the anti-establishment candidate because she was no longer in the cabinet. But I suppose we have to remember that, think about a week and a half before she put herself forward, she wasn't in the cabinet. But yeah, for her to win, it was clear that people were like pointing to the fact that they didn't necessarily like the direction that things were going in. So they were going to vote for, I suppose, what they saw as the alternative.
It was a way of us all expressing our disquiet and asking for a different direction. regardless of whether Lucy Powell wanted to have that role or not, that's why we voted for her in
and I think there will be expectations on her now, and that's a good thing.
And before we move on to the Class Hero Hall of Fame and your nomination, I just want to sort of talk to you about reform. And we've learned today, Bell, that you're a lifelong anti-racist campaigner. I just want to ask the open-ended question: how do we beat Nigel Farage and reform?
Well, I think first we don't try and play their game. And, this has happened time and time again. We are no good at being very right wing. We're just not good at it. We're Labour, and whenever we try, we perform pitifully. So we should leave that type of behaviour to the people that I suppose know what they're doing best and get on with being a socialist democratic party. And that means doing all of those things and standing on all of those principles that have actually won us elections in the past. At the moment, if you look at the figures, whilst reform is going to win in certain constituencies, judging by the polls, the reason why they're going to win is not because we're losing loads of votes to them, but it's because we're losing loads of votes to the left of us. And the idea that people are to the left of us is worrying. I mean, look what happened in Wales. And we look at where the Green Party are picking up a lot, and obviously your party as well. The reality of the situation is we are not losing votes to reform, so why would we play to their tune? And also, we need to stop helping the media with this self-fulfilling prophecy. The media claim that they're giving reform so much airtime because of the polls. I don't know of a situation where people were given lots of airtime because of polls before, and I think that's definitely something that we need to dig into. The more airtime reform are given, the more we talk about them as a party. The more we talk about them as a party, the more airtime they're given. Reform have the same number of MPs as the Green Party. Why is it that when I go on television on a political panel show, I'm more likely to be sat next to a Reform person than a Green person? The media are helping them win, and we are helping the media do this by over talking about them. We are 4 years from an election. The idea that Reform get to put out a policy and it's being treated even more importantly than when the Lib Dems or the Conservatives say something has to be fundamentally wrong, and we need to stop helping them make their case. This is just the type of PR that people would pay hundreds of thousands of pounds for, and we're giving it to them for free.
Yeah, we just had a by-election in Colchester on the same day as the Caerphilly by-election, and we had a meet the candidate session in the local pub, and the candidate asked me, he said, "What should we do about reform?" And I said, "Talk about Labour."
Yeah.
Don't talk
Absolutely.
about reform is my advice of what to do in the election campaign. Set out the positive things that you want to do. Set out your Labour values and set out the positive things which Labour in government and Labour in the council has done. Don't talk about reform. I agree with you about losing votes to the left, because as we speak, the latest opinion poll has put Labour in third place behind the Greens, which is just an extraordinary state of affairs.
It is, and people think the places where we have issues, and I think that's something that's always got to me in terms of what they refer to as Labour heartlands. Now, I know we lost before the last election, and obviously we seem to have picked them up, what people call Labour heartlands. But why isn't Brixton, why isn't Hackney considered a Labour heartland? We are also Labour heartlands. We are places where people have voted Labour, regardless of whether they've got it right or wrong in that particular instance, but they've always trusted. And we need to be careful. And I will always point to what happened in 2015. So during the 2015 election, I was actually working for Diane at the time, and I remember we were meant to be doing her vote count that evening. So we were at the counting centre, but no one was paying attention to counting the votes because we were in the other room watching Scotland fall one seat at a time. And it was a shock. It was clearly a shock to a lot of those members in Scotland. What you're meant to do when an election comes up, if you're in a not so safe seat, you generally pack up your whole office and take it with you to avoid the embarrassment of coming back and cleaning out your office. If you're in a safe seat, like Diane has been for years, you generally pack everything into the cupboards so that they can get the carpet cleaned when no members of Parliament are in. And that's what generally happens in a general election. The week after that election, I saw so many of our colleagues from Scotland there for ages, packing up boxes and wheeling things out because they never thought they were going to lose. And the message from that is you need to be careful, because the idea that some people may not one day just get up and stop voting Labour because they've had enough of broken promises is not true. We need to make sure that we are consolidating our base and reminding those that have always voted for us, even if we're doing some things to reach out to other voters, that we are still here. We still have these progressive values and views. If we're not careful, those groups that have always voted for us, just like they did in Scotland, will get up and walk away.
The other thing that I think, if we're going to stop reform, and I've discussed this with your colleagues John McDonnell and Richard Bergen, is that as well as changing political direction and delivering for our core vote, I think one of the ways we could take the wind out of the sails of Nigel Farage would be to start arguing for proportional representation. What's your stance on that issue?
I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea at all. I do think, however, we do need to have a system that works for the UK, because I have been, and there was actually a time I was speaking to representatives of a particular campaign for proportional representation, and I'm not going to lie, I wasn't happy with some of the responses I got. And I explained to them that generally I am of that view, but I do have some reservations. And I explained my issue about far right groups and such things. And, you know, let's say there were 3 people on the call, and one of them said, well, you know, that's representative of the country. So, you know, that's democracy. Yeah, I mean, the idea that we could elect people who, as far as I'm concerned, believe that I have no right to exist freely. Another person said, well, you know, even if they did elect them, people would see that they were awful after one term and they'd vote them out.
That's high risk.
Yeah, exactly. And then the final person came up with, I think, having seen my looks of disgust from the first 2 responses, made the point that actually different systems work for different countries. And in some countries, what they've actually done is to stop this situation where you have fascist parties taking over, you have a certain percentage. So you're not getting people who, let's say, have very fringe and objectional views, and this is not in an undemocratic way at all. We have rules. We have rules about human rights. We have laws that protect people from minorities. So those limits help stop fascist parties from getting through. And I think if we could do something like that, then why not? But if it was going to be open season, and then I'm not sure how I would feel about that. But it looks like that's what we're leaning towards, and the reason why we're leaning towards it is because our first past the post system hasn't delivered what people want when they vote. And actually, we have a system where I don't think people are encouraged to vote enough. Quite controversially, I wish we had the Australian system where everybody was registered and required to vote by law. I want true political representation and people actually using their vote. And with that, I think should come an element of education, because the reality of the situation is I don't think enough people are taught about citizenship, definitely not in schools, and following that in the way that they should be. So people don't even know how to access their representatives in the way that they should when things go wrong.
So it's a yes to PR, but with a threshold to stop very small minority parties.
Yeah, and we need to make sure that it works for this country, and we need to make sure that it's done with a programme of education as well. So
finally, Belle, let's move on to your nomination for the Class Hero Hall of Fame, the Labour Left Hall of Fame. I'm guessing that one of the contenders might have been a certain Diane Abbott, but
yes, but Diane's already been mentioned.
Yeah,
so
Rachel from the I'm for Labour Party Democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that she's been mentioned before. That shows what an icon she is. So I'm going to go for Bernie Grant.
Oh, brilliant, Bernie! Like, I think that somebody like you stands on the shoulders of the great Bernie Grant.
Bernie Grant, for me, it's so great for me, is Diane telling me that when they came in, he was very much their leader, self-professed leader. He of those new black MPs. He was unashamedly proud of his heritage, and actually he was the first person to call for reparations in Parliament, and he did it fearlessly. In fact, it was one of the last things he did in Parliament before he passed away. And I think that's something of which I personally can be very proud. And in terms of standing on his shoulders, really pleased to meet Bernie's sisters a couple of years ago, and they said he would be very proud of the continuation of that work. So that was very nice.
Compliments don't come much better than that.
No, they don't.
I did notice that there's a Bernie Grant scholarship to encourage black candidates to come forward.
Yeah.
And so many of those didn't make the Labour Party shortlisting process. They were novelled by HQ. So many of the people that came forward from that scholarship. Yeah,
that was really unfortunate. I am really disappointed in that. But as I said, they don't call it the struggle for nothing. And I mean, people keep asking me why I'm so optimistic, and I have to explain to them that I am a black woman backbencher on the left. You've got to be optimistic, and you have to realize that things don't happen overnight, but they do change. I mean, more recently, particularly Black History Month, I had to speak a lot about standing in pride and power, and actually recognizing that I stand in Parliament and I walk past the statues and the paintings of old white men who at some point in time may have owned one of my ancestors, and I get to be a member of Parliament in a Parliament where not so long ago women weren't even allowed to vote, and even earlier than that, people that looked like me were owned as property. And in that house, I get to call for justice for them because things change.
I remember Bernie. I was lucky to be in his constituency for a short period, and the things I learned about him was that, unlike so many MPs, he didn't come up through a professional route. He'd been a trade union full-timer, working for a trade union, as well as a prominent community black activist. When the uprisings occurred in the early 1980s, he stood with the campaigns to get justice for the people that had been wrongly accused of crimes. He did not back away from difficult issues. He was an absolute legend, wasn't he? Absolute legend.
He was indeed.
Thanks so much, Belle. I think I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. And I think it's great that many of us that are involved in the left of the Labour knew about you before the 3-day deputy leader campaign. But I think a much wider group of people got to show how much you've got to offer. And you may have experienced what John McDonnell called a stitch-up. And our leader may have removed you from being the shadow Minister for Migration. He may have sacked you as the UK trade envoy. But I can say with absolute certainty, we may live in uncertain and turbulent times, but I'm pretty confident we're going to be hearing a lot more of Bell Ribeiro-Addy. Thanks, Belle.
Thank you.